Well, good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Great to see everybody.
Hello.
It's 6:30, and we'll go ahead and get started. I know that other folks will jump on. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. I love that. There's so many positive people around here. So many thumbs up. That's great. So I feel like I know just about everybody on this meeting. We expect 50 to 70. There's 37 on right now. But if I don't know you, I'm Bill Nicely, Superintendent of the Kearney School District for about 4 more weeks. Adam Musto is my pastor. He's not the incoming superintendent. Dr. Matt Miller is the incoming superintendent. And he's going to talk to you in just a little bit, but he's on this Zoom meeting as well. We thought this would be a great opportunity for you to get to see him, and that's really an important part of what we're doing tonight. So I just want to kind of start off by saying, first of all, thank you for participating. We have we went through our group of people, adults and students that we know that we want to participate. Some of you already participate in a similar meeting. There are for those that don't know, there are a numerous number of groups that have been associated with this conversation around how to restart school. One of them is there's a city leadership group that meets on a weekly basis, which includes many of our first responders, leadership from the city, school district, and Ministerial Alliance and elsewhere. So we have weekly conversations about COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on our communities, and try to provide wraparound services to the extent that we can. Certainly have conversations around that. So those folks are on. We've invited our Board of Education. Their role is really one to listen, because we want to hear from you. And we have invited members of our School District Education Foundation as well, as there are certainly employees of the school district and transportation services and those folks also. And then many of you are students and or your parents. And if you're or another community member who has expertise in perhaps the healthcare or first responder field. So what's amazing about this community is we have so many experts in a wide variety of areas. A couple of years ago, when there was when there were numerous incidents of violence in schools, we put together an ad hoc committee around violence and safety of our schools, and we brought in this amazing number of individuals who were had experience in law enforcement and the like. So today, what we're doing is we're bringing a similar group together around the conversation of restarting schools. This is an ad hoc group, and I'll go in a minute. I'm going to talk about our purpose and what we're doing here today and what we might do going forward. But a couple of things I want to tell you is that, as I alluded to earlier, there's a city leadership group that meets on a daily basis or a weekly basis. There is there's a task force that we put together within the school district to really lay out fundamental plans for what restarting school will look like, and conversations about summer school and beginning sports and practices and all those kinds of things. A nice representative group there. And Jeff Morrison leads that. He's going to give you a little bit of background in a minute. And then there is Dr. Miller, who is, if you missed it, Dr. Miller is the incoming superintendent. He and I must talk to each other 4 or 5 times a week, just because we're in the same Zoom meetings. All of those are associated around how to restart school and what that's going to look like. And truthfully, the fact is we don't know yet. We just don't know, because this thing is changing so quickly. But what we do know is that we have a process to find out, right? It is what's the vision in our mind about what restarting school looks like? I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that we have a concrete process to get there. And so by the time mid-July rolls around, we think we're going to have a pretty concrete plan. But we need help. And that's what your purpose is. We're leaning on all of the other folks and groups that we're having conversations around, including all of the superintendents in the Northland, including all of the superintendents in the greater Kansas City area. And in some cases, we're getting information at the national level and really international level as well, because there are other countries who are further ahead with regard to the pandemic. And so they've already restarted schools, and we have them that we can learn from. So all of that is to say the Kearney solution will be our own unique solution. And so I'll talk in a minute about the specific role of this ad hoc group, and then we'll get started. But first, I want to introduce Dr. Miller and have him say a few words.
Well, hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to join the meeting this evening. I want to thank Dr. Nicely for including me and helping the transition go smoothly thus far. About a month away from the official start date, July 1. And although no one would have ever chosen these circumstances in our world right now, it has provided a unique opportunity to be able to work closely with district staff over the past several months and get to know people probably better than if I were traveling in person during the transition. So I want to reiterate appreciation to all of you for taking time to be a part of this group this evening. This is really important work, and to think about the connections that we're having on the international, national, state level, and having the expertise right here in the Kearney community to help us create a plan that's going to be a safe plan for students and staff, but also one that will allow us to provide excellent learning opportunities and experiences for kids and continue to improve on that framework, and the work that's been done there over a period of time is really important. And so I want to just say thank you for letting me be a part of the conversation tonight, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Good words indeed. I want to, if you should have received with the invitation to this Zoom meeting, you should have also received an agenda. And following the agenda, then I'm going to have Dr. Morrison talk about Mr. Morrison talk a little bit about the task force, and then we'll get into our purpose and start the breakout session. I do want to be honorable of your time, and so we will keep this hopefully to exactly 1 hour and then come back as needed. So as I alluded to, the district has put together a task force to oversee what the reentry of school looks like, what restarting school looks like. It's complicated stuff. Jeff Morrison has been leading that because as assistant superintendent, he's the ideal person. He's a whiz at logistics, number one, but he's the ideal person to bridge that transition of superintendent. So Jeff, could you give a little bit of overview of what your task force is and what it's been working on?
Happy to. Thank you, Dr. Nicely. Good evening, everybody. In the midst of this closure, we started to develop an internal task force. And with this, looking at the reopening for fall 2020 for students and staff. So we have individuals from different departments. We meet weekly, and really the big piece of it for us is to develop good checklists and protocols within our departments. So we obviously start with our instructional staff. We have teachers, our Director of Academic Services, Jennifer Kopp. We have representatives from building administration on this. We have technology, communications, individuals, data, custodial, maintenance and grounds, nurse, health, activities, and then transportation and food service. And as we've realized as a community, Transportation and food service have been very vital during this closure, of delivering meals and distribution of packets and maybe even Chromebooks out to kids. And so they've played an integral role during this closure, and they need to also be a part of this process as we look to reopen because what the services they provide. And so what we're really looking at is this group almost becomes that what if group, right? And so we're kind of tackling, we know what traditional school looks like. That was what we had early March of 2020. What we're tackling right now is if we have to do a hybrid approach. And I know that there's a lot of things when you mention the word hybrid. And then also too, the thing that we're looking at is how do we get better at virtual learning if we need that to continue at some point, or if we have to do that for a few kiddos in our district. So additionally, we kind of tackled 9 big topics each week. And those include, the obvious is instruction, but we include activities, business services, communications, nurse and health operations, personnel, school building processes, and technology. And so we look at those big pieces and say, what are all the things that we need to have thoroughly vetted as we look into the fall of 2020 and school reopening. So we're going to probably break from our task force out into kind of subcommittees in this coming week. One is going to look at instructional staff and the instructional side, and then the operational side. And we're going to tackle those big questions and then come back and reconvene. And so we appreciate what insight you're going to give to us tonight. And from the parent perspective for this and for our community. And then additionally, I help serve on a Northland task force, and this is our Northland school districts. We obviously have school districts in the Northland that are a lot smaller than Kearney, and those that are quite more populated than Kearney, for example, like North Kansas City. And we've also included Raytown into this, Raytown School District. And I think don't get caught up on the size of that with the school districts, but looking that here are school districts trying to come together to look at all the things that they're doing internally. And we're trying to come up with things that are good for kids, good for parents, and good for staff. And we're working through those reopening questions, those questions about summer school, questions about activities as they looking to start here in June. And so I think one of those things is that we're trying to have all of our good minds from all our districts around Kearney come together and create a good plan with that. So in addition, we're looking at different counties here. We're looking at Clay, Jackson, and Platte counties as well. So we're looking to see what their health departments are saying and just some things that we may, as I said before, those this is the time to ask those what ifs. So I appreciate all those leaders of the various departments serving on this, and we look forward to what you're going to give us for information tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Well stated. So a couple of other points of information that I wanted to point out around our purpose here this evening is you just heard from Jeff, and he talked about the task force. Heard a little bit from Dr. Miller and I, and some of the larger groups, various groups, I should say, varied groups of Zoom meetings that we participate in on a just almost a daily basis, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, I must say. But in addition to that, we recognize that there's a lot of questions out there, and we have a lot of questions, and we know parents have a lot of questions, and our community members have a lot of questions. So as an example, one of the questions that we have as a school district is how many students are going to show up in August when it's time to start school? Will parents keep their children home? Will they decide, hey, I'm homeschooling, you guys are done? Or will they say, I can't risk sending my child to school, but I still want you to educate them in a virtual way? How many of them will say, listen, it's just me, I've got to go to work, please take my kid? We think that we're going to have the whole gamut of all of those. And similarly, amongst our own staff, we have to take into their considerations. here's this incredibly dedicated group of teachers and support staff, which we saw that high level of dedication the last couple of months as they worked really day and night trying to educate kids in a virtual way and make sure that they were okay. How many of those are perhaps immune compromised, or how many of them are fit into that older category that they like, I don't know that I want to risk that. So we have to weigh those things, and that's some of the work that the task force is doing. So what we're doing in addition to the task force, though, is we're surveying our constituency, if you will. And we just collected a survey from our staff around these topics about their comfortability, about what it is that they feel like they need if they're going to come back to school and work. Following this meeting later on this week, we're going to send out a survey to all of our parents to find out about their comfortability. And we're not just going to do this one time, we're going to do this several times. And we kind of coined the term pulse survey, because we know as the pandemic changes, as perception changes, as there is a variety of varied communication about the pandemic, parents and staff members are going to have varying opinions about whether or not they're ready to come back. So what we have to do is take that information, take the information that you're going to provide, and then take scientific best practices. Clay County Health Director Gary Zabarak, I think, is on as well tonight, and we've really been relying on him and his department to give us guidance as time goes on. All of those things are changing. All of those are in a state of flux. Our goal is to bring them all together and make the most responsible decision. And so part of your role is to do that tonight. So as an ad hoc committee, what we'd like to do is call upon you to provide your opinion. But in addition to that, recognize that we may need you 1 or 2 or 3 other times, depending on how this flows, right? Because everything is in a state of flux. The idea behind an ad hoc is that we pull together people that we think can provide some valuable input over a short period of time. We gain that information, that data, and we utilize it to the best of our ability, and then we go forward. That isn't to say that later on down the road, once we get school going, that we wouldn't come back and say, how are we doing? That's very possible. So from the standpoint of collecting data, there's a couple of ways that we're going to do that. First of all, go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the chat. We want you to, as we go through this, we want you to provide your ideas, questions, and comments. We're going to record all of those, and then hopefully be able to answer those or garner your input from those. Second of all, we're going to start off with a couple of key questions tonight, and that's really all we're going to jump into at this point tonight. But what we're going to do is Ryan, our tech extraordinaire, is going to put us in breakout rooms, and then you're going to have facilitators: Jennifer Kopp, Heather Gilkey, Jeff Morrison, Dr. Miller, Dave Schwarzenbach, and Rebecca Parks are going to be leaders of those breakout rooms, and they're going to facilitate conversation around 2 different questions. We'll come back, we'll hear from them as they collect notes about what you said oriented around those questions, and we'll hear those, and we'll collect that information as well. You can keep the chats going on the side of your screen with other questions and ideas. And then here's what's going to happen. Once all this is done, and we hear from the breakout leaders, we're going to say thank you and have a great evening, and hopefully it'll be 7:30. I better wrap this up if we're going to. And then you're going to go, oh man, I wish I would have said X, Y, or Z, right? So you have Becky Burkemper's email because she emailed you. You can reply to that or email any one of us, reach out to us with your thoughts and ideas. So with that, Ryan, I hope you're ready. We're going to go to the first preliminary question, which is this: with regard to your child or children in our school district going back to school in the fall, what level of comfort do you have right now and why? So we're going to go to a breakout session, and your facilitators will facilitate conversations around that. And I think screen's going to pop up here any minute with a go to breakout session, and you'll be able to do it. Okay, great. I think we're all back. I know that there was likely in all of these breakout rooms, conversations going on. And that got cut off. So you're going to be placed back in that same breakout room to continue that conversation in a minute. But let's hear just quickly from our breakout room leaders. Jennifer Kopp, what was your conversation?
I think for the most part, our parents are comfortable with the kids going back. Someone mentioned that they think that kids have become more aware and they have really stepped up their game, which I would agree with. And that regardless of whether kids go back to school or not, the kids are going to be getting together more and more as we go on. I think the biggest concern is the level of support for our school healthcare workers and their ability to be able to monitor symptoms and, treat each incident with the way it needs to be treated. Tracking everything, making sure if, different symptoms, whether it's flu symptoms or fever, making sure kids don't come back too soon. How are we going to work out quarantining students? I think everyone is comfortable as long as we have a plan in place and the support for our healthcare workers. Anybody else in my group have anything else to add to that? Okay.
Heather Gilkey, thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my group had a little bit of a different take on things. We had a nice mixed group, parents, healthcare workers, and a student. So we had nice rounded conversation, and all tended to agree that they are very anxious about sending kids or going back to school themselves just because of all of the unknowns. One of the parent healthcare workers mentioned that we don't fully know everything yet, and this has longer lasting effects than just the respiratory distress or things that we see in the beginning. But some of these people and students, children that contract this have long-term effects, and so that really makes them nervous. It was kind of mentioned that you don't know who to trust necessarily with information. And so getting good, solid, real, true health information about this virus would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. Jeff Morrison, how about your group?
Yeah, so my group was varied with parents, and then also I had transportation and food service in there. So generally that said more comfortable than not. But one of the points of our conversation centered around mask and people breathing on one another. That's the way to prevent it. And so, but then that presents some challenges, right? As we had we had a teacher in there in our group that said, kids need to see a teacher's face. So how do you do that? And then kids taking a break away from mask, that's needed as well. And then when you add in the piece of transportation, what do you have? You want a driver that sees the road, right? And so does that cause an hindrance of that, or do you have a face shield? And then when you look at food service from that standpoint, having the proper mask and ventilation when you're in a hot kitchen. So that's kind of the point of our breakout. We were really talking about that, but did feel good that had some good comments that said, feel like we have good people in place that are making good decisions for the best for both our kids and our staff. So that was really the piece. So if anybody else would want to chime in from that group, anything that I missed there.
That's really good. I mean, just the wide variety of considerations is just absolutely amazing. Dr. Miller, how about your group?
Well, some similar comments about masks and trusting that the school district is going to have adequate measures in place, which will increase confidence for returning students to school. it's interesting. There's a reflection of all the different circumstances that families may be in and will be in, from a childcare need for needing schools 100% every day, regardless of situation, to being more flexible from a parent perspective, and also the importance of contingency plans if we're able to start off the school year in August fairly normally, but then there's a resurgence of and a higher increased infection rate as we go through. Anyone from our breakout group want to add to that?
Okay, thanks. That's good. We have had lots of conversations around recognizing this thing is going to fluctuate, and there are going to be students, because of a parent or a relative that they've come in contact with, or even themselves, are going to have to quarantine for 14 days, and our staff will do the same thing. So we need to make sure that we can provide services to students, whether they're at home or at school. Dave Schwarzenbach, did you have a group?
Yes, I did. Actually, we talked about similar concerns. They're comfortable. The majority are comfortable going back to school. They know the importance of, the in-person learning. One area that just stood out that we didn't really mention so far was just the education on good hygiene and educating our kids on what that looks like, and making sure those practices are a part of that back to school process. Group, anything I missed there? Okay.
Thanks, Dave. And then I believe Bart Woods, you had a group as well. Is that correct?
Yes. Our group, I think it'd be fair to say, had some concerns. I think most, despite those concerns and continued reductions in cases, would be comfortable in sending their students to school. I believe our healthcare worker probably had the most confidence in that, which I found was interesting, because they also are the most knowledgeable and in tune with it as well. So that pretty much summarized what we got through in our time.
Thank you, sir. And then I believe the last is Rebecca Parks.
So our group, it was really reassuring that they all felt very comfortable and trust in sending their kids back, and trusting that the school district will put measurements in place for safety. There were definitely questions versus just really regarding how do you maintain some of those parameters, like what does it look like with an alternative schedule for elementary versus secondary? The idea of, is an alternative like a rotating schedule better for students so that there's less rigidity in thinking about that social and emotional piece for kids? Thought there was good conversation on the point of families working together. We have to grow our community culture on understanding, having that recognition of privacy on families and what they've done over the summers, versus also asking questions. So really balancing both of those concepts to make sure that everyone is safe, and teaching our kids about the safety, the importance of hand washing and hugging and maintaining some distance and all of those things. Does anyone else have anything to add from our group?
Okay, good stuff. Is that all of the groups? I think there were 7. Haven't forgotten anybody. Okay, if you haven't checked out the chat comments and questions, some really good stuff over there. Keep those coming. We appreciate that. We're going to send you back into the same groups. And this time the question is a little bit more specific. What specific action steps should schools consider to ensure a safe and healthy learning environment as we begin next year? So we'll look forward to your responses there.
single one of them has ran a fever. So.
It looks like everybody's back, so let's hear what everybody had to say. Jennifer Kopp, how about your group?
Well, first we talked about, you've got these kids that are overachievers and they worry about missing school. So we need to have something in place for them so that they feel like if they miss, they're not going to get too far behind. They're not going to get dinged on anything. So that led to that we really need to have some type of a strong online option. And in addition to taking care of kids who may be ill that need to stay home, that might also free up space in the school for kids. Another thing talked about is that the first step is that the staff has to be comfortable with their environment, the cleanliness of the classroom, the spacing of the kids, because if you do lose a teacher for a couple weeks, that has a huge impact when you have subs in there trying to carry on with the class. So again, some type of surveillance for the students and staff, temperature checks when kids come in, because often people don't know when they're sick. They'll have that temperature and not even know it. So that would also give an added layer of protection for the staff. And then Owen brought up that you've got to think about those after school activities as well, and monitoring the sports, the band, and all those kids that are together at those times. So how do you go about doing that? And then I would love it if Tracy and Andy would talk about the antibodies testing, because that one went a little over my head.
I'll talk about it really quickly. It basically tells you if you have developed antibodies against COVID-19, that your body has actively started and hopefully completed taking care of the virus. And it doesn't do a whole lot for us, other than it probably gives some of the staff some confidence that that they may have some built up immunity against it. We don't know everything about it quite yet. Not every test is 100% accurate, but if there is a way to give teachers that extra bit of confidence that, if they were asymptomatic and didn't know that they had it, that their body has the ability to fight it off, especially if you are immunocompromised or have some chronic disease processes already, that you have that extra layer of protection. That's about it. And it's expensive, so that's another cost like Owen was talking about.
Awesome. Good information. Heather Gilkey.
Yeah, so we had a really good conversation about what some alternative scheduling might look like. One of our participants is actually working on her doctorate, and so COVID is that. And so she's looked at a lot of things. So she was kind of talking about some universities, and one in particular that was considering kind of trying school as normal in the beginning with all the precautions and stuff to get kids back on campus. And then by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, kids would not come back after Thanksgiving break. They would move to the online platform so that any travel or anything that took place over Thanksgiving wouldn't be a factor in the classroom. So for transmission purposes. And then we also talked about how alternative days might affect kids, their social lives, especially if they're older. Maybe friends aren't on the same schedule that they would be on. Some concerns that maybe kind of out of sight, out of mind. We've been away for the summer, the threat is over, and older kids coming back, maybe not taking those things as seriously maybe as we should at that point. Another good comment made about disabilities. and how that affects people who have to read lips. And if you're wearing a mask, you can't read lips. Zoom can be a problem because it doesn't have closed captioning. So lots of good things that we really need to think about moving forward. And if I forgot something, please let us know. Put that in the chat so that we can get note of that.
Thank you, Heather. Great questions in the chat. I almost feel like we need to compile those and send some of those back out to all of you for some responses. Jeff Morrison.
So our group kind of definitely, we looked at the hygiene versus school versus home, right? And then the educating of kids. But more importantly, we really got into the weeds of temperature checks. Do you start that with kids getting on the bus? Do you have places where it's at the classroom, scanning of those for all the kids? So that's really the big piece of our discussion. And I think what we came up with from the overall piece is we need to have a best practice and continue with that best practice. And then I think with the point of having a task force is if something's not working, we have to reconvene and come back and what is maybe a better practice with that. So we really kind of focused in on temperature checks and the hygiene for kids, and then home versus school.
Just judging from the chats, that's going to be a logistical conundrum to overcome for sure. Dr. Miller?
Well, I hope that you weren't making that segue about conundrums or logistical conundrums, and that was your segue to me, Dr. Nicely. But anyway, we covered a lot of ground too. Sounds like the other groups have as well. Everything from some things like Mr. Sublet's in our group, and he was talking about bottle fillers that are being installed. They're touchless throughout the district for that. One thing I thought was interesting was is as much as there are unknowns with this still new virus, there are some things that we do know that social distancing can work and masks can work, even though there are a lot of challenges with implementing those in a school setting. And then another thing we talked about was that the change from emphasis on that COVID-19 is primarily transmitted through respiratory droplets, which is a change, and it changed away from emphasis on some surface contamination. But then the messaging that goes along with that is as we learn more and information changes, then that also can sometimes undermine people's confidence in taking difficult measures or inconvenient measures like wearing a mask or keeping your distance from others. So we talked about temperatures taken as students come in, and just some of the logistical challenges with screening, transportation, schedules, and so on and so forth.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Miller. No conundrum connection intended. Bart Woods?
Yes, we spoke quite a bit about the way that different companies are doing it. In particular, we started off with Ford and the different protocols that they're using and how that's helped with their process. We've talked about the need for temperature checking and how that would look in the schools, and the need for us to do temperature checks rather than the honor system, because there may be the temptation to send students to school that may be borderline or on meds that has their temperatures controlled. So possibly taking temperatures midday, possibly for the influx on the buses to take it as they enter on the bus, whether that's with an aide or something along those lines. Those were discussed. We talked about general things, and I think this is probably heavier on the elementary side, but maybe everywhere, is trying to teach kids not to make contact with their face, with their fingers. And there's a lot of debate about contact and whatnot. But that's a natural thing that we all do. And as adults, we're more conscious of it, but teaching kids how to be more conscious of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Now I have a tremendous urge to scratch my nose. Dave Schwarzenbach.
We talked about increase of support for our healthcare staff. What does that look like for our nurses in the building? What can we do to support them? Again, bus transportation, how do you identify those kids that are getting on the bus that may have that fever? And of course, by the time they get off and at school, if they've, that's already happened. Social distancing, what does that look like in a classroom? What does it look like in high school in the hallways? And what does it look like in an elementary building? And how do you ensure that's going on? And then the other one is, the other part is we have our students that are asymptomatic, and then they come to school and then they go home, to their parents, and they're taking it with them. So, what are we doing on that side of it? So it's a good discussion.
Thank you, Dave. Rebecca Parks.
We had great discussions about logistics and communicating expectations, that parents are going to need some clear parameters or have a clear understanding of what we are saying is going to happen. And then the same thing needs to happen among our staff, because students will watch and they will notice any discrepancies. But then also considering that safe and being safe and healthy, having a safe and healthy and learning environment could vary by building or more so by age range. So what that looks like for elementary might be very different from the secondary level or middle school to the high school level. So just making sure that we're very specific about that, because guidelines right now are guidelines and they aren't specific, and parents are looking for what are you going to do? And then also looking at that community support on specifically for our families that are going to need their kids to be somewhere other than home every day because of work or whatever the situation may be. Maybe that's tapping into our ministerial alliance and utilizing classrooms or bigger spaces within our churches, something like that.
Okay, great. Awesome information. We're running out of time, but I appreciate everybody's participation. Dr. Miller is going to close us out.
Well, just to piggyback on what Mrs. Parks was saying about being examples, I remember it's been a long time ago, but I remember sitting, in this case, I was sitting in church next to my dad, and the pastor was delivering a message about just a story about, do as I say, not as I do. So like a parenting situation where they were talking about that. And I remember that story. I was really young, but I remember it very well because I remember looking at my dad and saying, yeah, Dad, you need to be the good example. And so that your story about being an example reminds me of that, Mrs. Parks. And along those lines, I want to thank you all for being a part of this work tonight. It's really important. And I think that we are being an example of something that, as a former fourth grade teacher, that I used to talk with my kids about, which is promoting the common good. And I don't know how many fourth graders you have in your life right now, or kids around that age, but the common good is a pretty simple idea, but not always to a fourth grader. The idea that you might sacrifice or do something that isn't necessarily in your own most best interest immediately in order to benefit everyone else. Well, that's what you're doing tonight, is you've sacrificed something to be a part of this work and to contribute to our community. And then in the end, we're going to have a really thoughtful, a really well-articulated plan that's going to communicate good, safe options for our families and a great learning environment. And so what that is, we don't know exactly yet, but you choosing to be a part of this tonight will help us continue that journey over the coming weeks. So just want to thank you for that. There's been a lot of work. As you can see, it's really complicated. And the more we think about it, the more complicated it gets. And so this is going to just have to be a process that will continue, and we'll refine it until we have an excellent plan in place. So we can continue to hit that mission, which is pursuing excellence today for tomorrow. So I want to thank you all one more time and really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you. Dr. Nicely, you want to say any final words?
No, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Miller said. Just appreciate your input. We will be in touch. Just the chats alone is valuable information. And if we can, we'd love to pull you back together. Look for the parent survey coming out later this week. That's incredibly important. Sonia Love is going to communicate that out in social media. And if you could help pass it around as well, that would be great. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.